welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend just a little bit of time talking about the phases of the game for new players. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and I love talking about phases and rules and those kinds of stuffs. So
I'm a teacher, Ted. This is a little aside. So as a teacher, it's one of the things that sometimes I teach is the phases of the moon, like new moon, waning gibbous, waxing crescent, whatever it is, right? And so, but there's
whatever it is you're supposed to do.
Right. So there's
to teach.
It's not that hard. But there's a song out there called Phases of the Moon, and it goes phases of the moon, phases of the moon, and it goes through all the phases of the moon. And every time I'm saying phases of the game, I always think of that song, Phases of the Moon.
Okay.
So
we found another track for the Card Talk
playlist
soundtrack.
Yes.
Yeah, the Card Talk playlist.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think we're getting up there to almost a full album.
Probably.
For our playlist.
Probably. But anyways, our normal content during February is put on hold here as we needed to make sure that we addressed this new revised core set that's come out. So we wanted to talk specifically to the new players in the game and give them some advice, tips, tricks, and guidelines for being successful, because this game can be tricky, as we know, Ted. And so we have New Player February. So that's what we're doing here for our extravaganza month. But for any veterans out there and new players who feel like they want to support us here at Card Talk, I want to make sure I outline some of our options here, because normally we don't really do it. So we're kind of asking people specifically to do these things this time around, just to help us out here. So we have a YouTube channel. If you could subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, that would be great. We put out episodes usually around once a week over there, and playthroughs and all sorts of content over there. If you have questions or comments on shows, that's a great way to get a hold of us. If you're more of an audio podcast listener, all our shows are also on podcast format, so you can like, subscribe, review, rate us over on your favorite podcatcher. That would be great, because Ted, that feeds the algorithm, right?
Nom nom.
And basically, it's great for new people who are looking for more content on the game to push this up. So when they search for content, it's there. Like normally we don't ask for it, but new players looking for content, Card Talk's pretty good resource. So we also have a blog over at cardtalk2018.com where we go in depth on player card reviews. You can subscribe to us over there. And then lastly, we do have a Patreon. That's kind of that's the ultimate way of showing your thanks for us putting out this content. We have a bunch of different levels to join us. It helps us keep the lights on here at the podcast and over at the blog. We give out swag to all our patrons, as long as you're a patron between April and Con of the Rings, which happens at the beginning of October. You get to call Ted all sorts of names if you join at a certain level over at the Patreon. So
I won't even get mad about some of them either.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's there's a lot of ways to support what we are doing in the community, and it's a great time for you to help us out. Having said that, Ted, let's get into the content and what people are really here for, instead of having me drone on and on about how they can support us. Let's talk about how we're supporting them, because in this episode, we're going to talk about the combat phase in detail. Now, normally,
put up your dukes. It's fighting time,
right? Normally, I would explain kind of the theme behind this phase, but it's pretty easy. Pretty easy. This is where you're fighting stuff.
If orcs are attacking you, you should fight the orcs.
Right. You can defend them, and then you should attack them back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ted, well, get into it. What's the combat phase looking like?
All right. So as we continue our new player series, we are discussing the combat phase, and let's get into it. So a lot of stuff happening here. So we'll just go at it. So the first thing is this is after the engagement phase. So this is assuming you know check out that video that we did with the travel phase if you have questions there. But this is after the engagement phase. So at this point in the game, you have one or more enemies engaged with you, and then you know, or each player might have one or more enemies engaged with them as well. So the first thing that happens at the very beginning of the combat phase, is each enemy is dealt a face down card, which is called a shadow card from the encounter deck.
Right. And so it's a face down encounter card, like Ted said. And Ted, you know what doesn't happen before dealing shadow cards? There is
There's
no action window, which is interesting because, you know, it's not horrible, especially in these first scenarios, but sometimes you forget to do something in the engagement phase and you think, oh, I'll do it here at the beginning of the combat phase, and unfortunately there's no action window until after encounter cards are played. But nonetheless, you know, you still have to wait until after shadow cards are put face down on the enemies in order to take actions. Common actions that you take during this phase, during this action window, are usually feint. So that's the combat action to cancel an enemy attack.
Yep. You may be playing Blade Mastery. That's an action which gives a hero +1 attack and +1 defense for the phase. So there's a couple of tricks. A lot of them are in the tactic sphere. So if you're playing the tactics deck that's got the red sword icon, that usually has the most tricks in it because that's what that sphere is sort of designated and
tricks and bonuses and all sorts of stuff to help combat. That's why it's tactics, right? That's why they call it.
So we'll get to resolving the shadow card, but at this point in the game, they're just dealt face down.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's an action window, Dave. Now, this action window is important for at least one card out of the core set that I can think of, and that is...
Well, I said feint. This is what I said feint for.
Well, right? I should. There is a lore attachment that I want to say dark knowledge.
Oh, dark knowledge.
Yeah. So dark knowledge. This is the time where if you have dark knowledge in your lore deck, which it's a 1-cost lore attachment, it's an action to exhaust it, and you pick an enemy that's engaged with you, and you get to look at its shadow card. This is the time that you would want to trigger dark knowledge if you had it.
Right.
You could take other ones. Feint is another. This is the window to play the feint card, which is stopping an enemy from attacking as a combat action for 1 resource. Blade Mastery, for example, you could boost a defense of a character that you're going to be defending with to take less damage. So all those types of cards are played right now.
Yep.
Quick Strike also played right now. There's a pretty hefty list of eligible cards.
You can play Quick Strike anytime you want, but this is when it makes the most sense in the combat phase.
Yeah, right. Because what comes next is resolving enemy attacks. That process starts now, and it's going to start with the first player who's active, and they're going to if you have multiple enemies engaged with you, you can pick them and resolve them in any order that you want to. I'll kind of go back a step and mention that I believe by the rulebook, shadow cards are technically dealt to the highest threat enemies first.
Goes in order.
So if you have a 36 threat enemy and then a 12 and a 10, that's how the shadow cards are dealt.
And in player order. So you start with the first player's enemies, highest threat down to lowest threat. And the only and that comes into play mainly because if the encounter deck ever runs out of cards during this phase, you do not shuffle the encounter deck, and that's something to
Correct.
keep in mind. And so if you run out of cards in the encounter while you're dealing out shadow cards, you're done. So in general, most card players don't necessarily care the randomness about, having a card face down. It's not necessarily a big deal whether it's on the 36 threat cost or the 10 threat cost, but if you're running out of cards, you make sure that you deal them to the highest, first player highest to lowest, then second player highest to lowest, and so on.
Yeah, it doesn't sort of by the, I don't know, math and probability and statistics side of that, right? I don't think it maybe matters too, because it's all sort of random. But by the rules, that's what we want to make a note. That's how it should be done.
Well, it's really good to be the third and fourth player as you're running out of encounter cards, right? Because then you may not
it's quite possible. Because
it happens. I won't say often, but it happens enough that it's a feel-good moment in the game when you don't have to deal with a shadow card.
Yeah, if your enemy does not have a shadow card, that is an advantage, and we'll get to that when it comes time to resolving the shadow cards. So we're going to be resolving enemy attacks, starting with the first player. If you have multiple enemies, you can do whatever one you want to first, and in the play order that makes sense for you. Mm-hmm. And then at this point, you're going to resolve the enemy attacks, and you do that by choosing if you're going to declare a defender for an enemy attacking, or if the attack is going to go undefended. So I'll explain each of those as well. So if you're going to defend an enemy, you have to exhaust a character. So let's say we're going to be using Gimli to defend. He's a core set hero in tactics. He's got 2 defense, 5 hit points, 2 willpower, 2 attack also. So if I'm getting attack from a dual Gul'du Orcs, which has a 2 attack value, and I exhaust Gimli, which has 2 defense, we're going to then reveal, once I declare that as my defender, the next step will be to then reveal the shadow card. And the shadow card is going to be either something bad or nothing.
Right. I don't think
Very
that there's
rarely,
a good shadow effect in the game.
No, I can't really think of any.
And so on the encounter cards, there's the card art, and then there is the game text, and then there's what they call the shadow line. It's a long line. It's got a little skull in the middle of it, and anything written below that line is the shadow effect. That is the
and it will
only.
Say also
right, it'll say shadow, and it's the only part of the card that's active. You don't have to worry about any of the game text above it. You don't have to worry about the picture, the card name, the cost, whatever. The only part of the card that's active as a shadow card is the part below the shadow line that has the shadow, that says shadow. And it reads, if there's no shadow effect, then you got a freebie. But this is functionally the way that the encounter deck gets to make up some ground on you in the game.
Some common shadow cards from the core set as an example. Defending player must choose and discard 1 attachment he controls. So if that got flipped up, it doesn't have to be an attachment on the defending character. So if this Gimli has an attachment like a Citadel plate, I don't have to choose that exact attachment. I could pick a different attachment because it says defending player. Another example of a shadow card is attacking enemy gets +1 attack. If this attack is undefended, also raise your threat by 3. So it has that +1 attack no matter what, but then it has an additional penalty if you declared no defenders, which we'll also discuss.
Yep. And then there's a couple of shadow effects that cause you to have to do what the card says. There's Iron Shackles, which make you have to do the when revealed effect, but that is it's clearly labeled in the shadow effect, resolve the when revealed. And then there's another enemy that is a shadow card, and it says put this card in play, engaged with you and deal it a shadow card, the Wolf Rider. So, there's a couple of things that cause you to have to do what the card says, but it's very clear that you have to go back up. The game itself, the shadow effects are really just below that shadow line, that long line. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm sure that it's supposed to be a picture of something like an arrow spear or something with a skull in the middle of it. But
David, let me ask you this. Let's say I'm fighting this dual Guldur orcs.
yeah, we
and
love
I'm looking.
Guldur orcs.
Yeah, because they're fun to say. Dual Guldur orcs.
I know, right?
Let's say I'm fighting this enemy, and when I look at this card that I'm engaged with these orcs. It has a shadow effect on it. The shadow effect says attacking enemy gets +1 attack, +3 if it's undefended.
Yeah.
Is that a shadow effect that I have to deal with?
It is not, because that is the engaged enemy. So because that's the engaged enemy, that's its name in your play area. The shadow card was the card that you dealt to it upside down, and that's the card only that you have to worry about the shadow effect. Right. So it's about knowing kind of the names of what the cards are.
Yeah, the enemy that you're engaged with, like, if that enemy has a shadow effect printed on its card, it doesn't happen every single turn. You don't read it during the combat phase. It essentially doesn't exist. It only exists when you're looking at the shadow card as its own separate, like, mechanical device that it is.
Right. Yep. And then after you resolve the shadow effect.
Yeah. So. And you might also have a card that has no shadow effect. There might just be no shadow text on the card, in which case it's just there's no effect. That means that the enemies, there's nothing else to resolve. So then you just move forward to resolving the attack.
Right. Yep. And that's a feel-good moment in the game too when there's no shadow effect.
Yeah. So in this particular example, if I have the dual Guldur orcs of attack 2 and I have Gimli defending for 2, you basically just look at the difference. So I got 2 attack versus 2 defense. That defense completely mitigates and stops all the damage.
Yep.
Now, if I was taking an attack from Ungoliant Spawn, right? Okay. Which is a unique spider enemy in the core set that attacks for 5, and Gimli defended it, he would take,
surprisingly enough, Ungoliant Spawn is not unique.
Oh, that's right.
At least in the current, there may be a unique symbol in the revised,
the revised will make it unique.
I don't know. So there's probably several Ungoliant Spawn. It's not just one.
That's true. It's a spawn of Ungoliant, not the one spawn. Right, yeah. It's a spawn.
Anyways, that's beside the point. Uniqueness doesn't matter in attacking, but your point is when it's 5 versus 2, the overflow, the excess attack that the spider had goes to subtract the hit points that your character has.
So since Gimli's got 5 hit points, he survives. He takes 3 damage or no damage with the dual Guldur orcs. He's totally fine. If the damage equal or exceeds that character's hit points, they're destroyed.
Yep.
They're killed.
He's removed.
They dead.
Yep. Gets put.
They're dead, Jim. Take his stuff.
They're dead, Jim.
Put that hero, put that ally, and all their attachments go to the discard pile. It's very common for allies to get discarded throughout the game. If it's your hero, that is very, very unfortunate because they're very difficult to bring back into play. So it's a pretty big penalty to lose your hero.
Right. You can bring heroes back into play with Fortune or Fate. We have a show on that if you want to go check that out. But it costs a lot, and it's not the best strategery move.
You have to have the card. You have to have the resources for it. It's a spirit card, so a lot of things going on with that. So I kind of like this format here, David, where I ask you some questions.
Sure,
so because I defended with Gimli, Gimli's got 2 attack. Does he deal that attack back to the orcs? Is there an exchange of blows?
No. So in some of the other competitive card games like Magic the Gathering, like enemy attacks and player attacks happen kind of simultaneously. You kind of do it all at the same time, but player attacks, my player attacks, happen at a separate point in the game that is different from when the enemy attacks. So you have to go through all the enemy attacks so that they're culling your squad, so to speak. And then you go into player attacks. But so enemies will attack one at a time in the same fashion that Ted has described so eloquently, until all the enemies have attacked, and it'll go enemy by enemy in player order. You get to choose which enemy, but it goes first player enemy attacks, second player enemy attacks, third player enemy attacks, on down the line. There are some things to worry about with enemy attacks, such as the Sentinel keyword. And so,
let me get to that actually. So I want to rewind this because I think this is kind of a good way to walk through some things. So let's rewind this, David. I'm taking an attack from these dual wielder orcs, and let's say all my characters are exhausted. I sent them all questing because we needed willpower, and now I have these orcs.
You do that all the time to me.
I do it all the time. I'm stuck with these orcs.
Right.
So there's a couple of options here. So the first thing I want to discuss.
Good thing I'm playing with Aragorn.
Well, so I look over at your side of the table and I say, David, you have a Denethor on your side of the table. He's a 3 defense hero. Can I ask you to help me with your Denethor and block my dual wielder orcs that I can't defend?
And my response to that will be no. I cannot, because I had to look up to see whether Denethor had a Sentinel keyword.
That wasn't a trick question.
No, I was just double checking because you were asking me. I was like, no, but there is no way that my Denethor can defend your Dol Guldur orcs. So, Ted, I'm sorry. Well, because that keyword that you're looking for is Sentinel, and Sentinel, as the name implies, is a defensive keyword that allows my characters that are printed with Sentinel to defend for other players around the board. And so they don't have to defend for me. They can defend for other. They can defend for me, but they can definitely defend for other players too. So it's another way to allow for interaction between players and discussion points and decision points that go on.
So if you're playing the leadership hero Aragorn,
yeah, I'm in.
You're in. He has a Sentinel ability, so I could ask you, or you could offer and say, "Well, Ted, I see you're in a position of disadvantage against those dual Guldur orcs, the DGO."
Right. The DGOs. Right. I will definitely Sentinel defend for you, and this happens during Ted's defenses. It's happening during his defenses. So it's not during my turn that I'm defending on his side, because it's an enemy attack that Ted is engaged with. We are choosing to engage it with my guy, but it's still his enemy attacks.
Okay, so let's say we go down this path and you defend for me with Aragorn, and I flip over the shadow card, and the shadow card says defending player discards 1 attachment. So does that mean I have to discard an attachment, or does that mean you have to discard an attachment because you are defending it with Aragorn?
So that's the beauty, is that because you are the defending player, Ted, I am the one that's controlling the character, but that enemy is still attacking you. So you are the defending character. So you are going to have to, or you're the defending player, so you are going to have to get rid of an attachment that you control, despite the fact that I am the character that's attacking it.
Yeah, it's a very common mistake when players Sentinel defend. They think that so that character is the defender, but it's not the player that's being attacked. Like, the player being attacked is different than the character defending. Those are 2 separate things. So the shadow card might target the character defending. If it says deal 1 damage to the defending character, that would be Aragorn in this case. But if it says the defending player raises his threat by 4, if that enemy is engaged with me, I'm the defending player. The defending player is who is engaged with the enemy. The defending character is who's being declared as a blocker.
Correct.
Basically.
Yep.
Let's rewind this again.
Okay.
And let's say I'm being attacked by the DGO.
Yep.
They're coming to get me. The dual door orcs. Yep. And again, I've sent all my characters questing, and you sent all of your characters questing. You sent every single one. Now there's no hero or ally eligible as a defender. What happens?
Well, it seems like we don't have any way to defend these attacks, so it seems like that guy
Sweet.
is going to
Don't take
come
any
in.
damage.
It seems like that attack is going to happen, and it's going to be what we call undefended, which triggers a whole separate sets of things and things that you can't ignore. You can't just ignore the damage, Ted, unfortunately.
No.
Because then nobody would be defending. Everybody would be like, I'm taking undefended. No damage anywhere. Right? And you get a sense for this with the hill troll. Like, you get a sense that undefended damage has to go somewhere, right? The hill troll is a special case where extra damage above and beyond the, that's
the defensive
wasted.
Points,
yeah,
right?
It has to go to your threat, but that gives you a sense that that the game is trying to do something with that. You can't just undefend your characters away. So, what happens to that undefended damage, Ted?
Well, if I have to take an undefended attack, I have to take the full printed attack value of the enemy. In this case, it's 2 from the dual door orcs, and I have to place it on a hero. It cannot be an ally. Has to be a hero.
And it has to be a single hero.
It's a single hero, and I ignore their defense value because they didn't actively defend.
Right.
So if I am playing Legolas, who's got 4 hit points, I can take 2 damage and just put that 2 damage directly into Legolas from his 4 hit points. He doesn't subtract his 1 defense value. He just takes it straight to his beautiful elf face.
He didn't defend it, so it was almost like he got backstabbed, or he didn't try to do anything. He just took the swing from the Dolgador orcs and took that damage. Now, Ted, my Aragorn has Sentinel on it. So can you put the damage on my Sentinel Aragorn?
I cannot. It's the similar case because I'm the defending player, not you. Right. So because the enemy's engaged with me, I have to take the undefended damage.
Yep.
As much as I'd love to put it on your Aragorn.
Right. And so when the
point. Go ahead.
It's funny because I'm sitting that way on your thing, so it almost looks like you're looking at me. You're like, No, I was just going to say, so here's the thing to keep in mind is if you take something undefended, or if you defend something and the shadow effect pushes the damage above and beyond the hit points, that character's destroyed. Ted said that very eloquently, very well. But that character then leaves play immediately. There's no interrupts or actions that you can take to heal that like retroactively. So it's something you have to keep in mind in this game, that you have to make sure that your character's health is considered before you get into attacks. I mean, sometimes there's nothing you can do, but a lot of times you can do healing before all of this happens so that you don't have to worry about losing your characters as much as you would beforehand.
Mm-hmm. There is, and this is getting kind of into the advanced state of things, but there is an action window. Let's talk about action windows.
Ted and his action windows.
Yeah. So when you are declaring a defender, so let's say, I'm defending with Gimli, and the Dolgador orcs, they attack for 2, and the shadow card says attacking enemy gets +1 attack. Right, so now they're attacking for 3, and Gimli's subject to suffer one hit point of damage. There's an action window in between resolving the attack. So the enemy attacks you, you declare defender, you reveal the shadow card, you perform the action on the shadow card, whatever it says, you resolve it, and then you resolve the full attack and do the math. And there's an action window there, so if I wanted to play something that boosted my hero's defense, such as Blade Mastery, because I had a tactics resource, I could do that. I could boost Gimli's defense to 3, and then the 3 attack hits on the 3 defense, and I take no damage. Bit of an advanced play, because you could play that before the attack, but you also could play it after the attack, and there's sort of reasons to do it both before and after.
And I think that that's where experience in the game comes along, is that, you know, you get experience in the game and you're like, oh, I should have played Blade Mastery before all this went down. Or sometimes you say, oh, I'm going to play Blade Mastery after it all goes down. You know, maybe you want to keep the one tactics resource available, but if you're desperate, you may have to. So boosting that one defense. And again, Ted is the action window guy. I'm the incremental guy. And so, very rarely is this game going to kill you right away, but one or two damage.
Slow choke.
It's that incremental thing, where, you take 1 or 2 hit points of damage this time, and then next time you're taking a couple more, and then all of a sudden you realize that, like, everybody's dead. And so it's like this incremental thing in the game where, you're just going through, and the game also makes incremental progress against you. So, that real, it's, it does happen that you get the Hammer Horns is a great example of, how you can get bombed in this game, and there are player cards that are also what we call bomb cards. I'll put that in quotes, but, in general, this game is all about incremental steps, both player steps. So maybe maybe that 1 damage now where you didn't play Blade Mastery, is fine, but then maybe it's not fine because next round you get a, you turn over treachery that does 2 damage to you, and you're like, I just lost a hero, and so who knows?
Yeah.
Everybody's hit that point, right, Ted?
Yeah, and that things can certainly take a worse turn, especially with shadow cards being the game's about dealing with unknown circumstance. You don't have knowledge of the encounter deck, you don't have knowledge of the shadow cards. There are some player actions to help you with that, like Dark Knowledge. We talked about the lore attachment that lets you peek at shadow cards, and if you know what that effect is, it lets you better plan your defenses strategically, right? So there's sort of reasons to do that.
Yep.
But
and Hasty Stroke is also, as we're talking about shadow cards, just real quick.
Yeah.
When you reveal that Hasty Stroke is like one of the few cards in the game that allows you to go back in time a little bit. And that's a response that you get to cancel a shadow effect that was just revealed. So if you have Hasty Stroke in your deck and you want to get rid of a shadow card, you let it reveal itself, but then you play Hasty Stroke, get rid of the shadow effect, and don't have to worry about it.
Yep, because that's a response. So those responses happen at lightning fast speed. They're sort of fast. They're faster than actions. They're the fastest card in the game, and you do what the response says, and some of those responses are to cancel or mitigate effects. In this case, you can cancel shadow cards completely and sort of rewind time, which is a very helpful thing.
Yes. Yep. And we haven't even gotten to the third part of combat yet, Ted.
No, which is what we're just getting to now. So we've handled all our defenses, and now we've blocked all these enemies, but we have to kill them in some fashion. Right?
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
And so it's not a coincidence that the last thing that the game is making you do is attack stuff. So if you go back a few phases, you've already gone through the questing phase, which you have to exhaust enemies for, and then now you've done defenses, which you've exhausted enemies for. And so now the last thing the game has you do is go in and attack enemies back. I always say it's the attack back, but but now this is where you look and you say, well, what do I have left to do? And sometimes you don't have any enemies, but they have to be ready. You can't just do something with an exhausted. Exhausted is when you use them and you turn them sideways. You have to have ready characters, which are heroes and allies, to do stuff. And so, at this point in the game, there's a chance, I won't say a good chance, but there's a chance that you've used all your characters up. You don't have anything else to do. But let's say you do, and so this is where we start in with attack backs.
That's right. So I have these dual Guldur orcs engage with me. If I have any characters that are still ready, they haven't exhausted yet for questing. They haven't exhausted through defending. They have not exhausted from some type of treachery or shadow effect that forced me to exhaust them. I'm now free to attack. So if I had was playing with any character who has an Legolas, for example, yeah, he's got 3 attack. He's a great attacker. He can attack back. The math is the same thing. You apply your hero's attack to the enemy's defense, subtract that, you deal damage, and then if their damage equals or exceeds their hit points, that enemy is destroyed. So if Legolas attacks the 0 defense, 3 hit point, DGO, Dual Guldur orcs, they just take 3 straight damage because they have no defense, and they're destroyed. Bada bada boom.
That's what we hope. And so the thing to keep in mind, okay, is, and Ted, you may have been about to get into this, but you know, you can only attack an enemy once. So once that enemy is attacked, it can't be attacked again for that turn. So, you know, and then there's some keywords that allow us to pile on, and there's also ways that allow, you know, and just naturally you don't have to just attack the character, the enemy with just one character. You can attack an enemy with as many characters as you have ready on your side of the table.
That was my next question, David. So let's say I'm trying to attack and defeat a 4th spider, which has got 1 defense and 4 hit points.
Sure.
And I have Glorfindel and I have Legolas. They each have 3 attack.
Yeah, they're attacking.
So what happens? Do I attack with Legolas and deal 2, and then Glorfindel attacks, and then he does 2? Or how do I resolve that attack when I have multiple?
Yeah, so when you have multiple characters attacking, you add up all. It's considered one attack. Remember, you can't attack an enemy more than once. Okay, so if you have multiple characters attacking, that is, you add up all the attack values, and so in this case that Ted has, that would be 6, and then you compare it to the defense. And then the difference gets taken away as hit points. If that hit points is greater, as the damage is greater than the hit points, that enemy is destroyed. So you have to make sure that you add up that. And you can have any number of people as long as they're ready to attack enemies. So, you know, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3. And then there's the ranged keyword, right, Ted?
Yeah, so much like how we explained defending, how other players cannot usually attack enemies, engage with other players. If you have an ally or a hero with a ranged keyword, that sort of lets you break that rule, and you can use ranged characters to attack enemies, engage with other players. And you can do that one of 2 ways. You can I can have all my ranged characters make 1 declared attack against one of David's enemies. Or if David is attacking his enemy, let's say he's using his Aragorn to attack his own forest spider, I could choose to assist with Legolas, and then it's considered to be 1 attack. So David has 3 attack, Legolas has 3 ranged, they combine for 1 attack of 6 against his orcs.
Right.
Teamwork, baby.
So, and, you know, there's some interesting things about ranged attacks also with first player tokens that you have to, you know, that gets into the subtlety of the game too. I don't know if that's worth bringing up now, but
I don't think we'll dive into all that, but that's
right.
That's the 2 main ways that ranged works. You just have to remember all this is resolved in player order.
Right.
So the first player does their defenses, second player does their defenses. and then third and fourth. And then it circles back. It starts over with the first player. They declare their attacks. People with range can help. And then second player, third player, etc. Fourth player.
Yep. And so it's not until the very end here that you actually get to attack and kind of call out the enemies. And so that can be frustrating. But again, incremental progress, right? Like if you can do a couple of damage, that may be good, and then, you just try to chip away, and, hopefully you add up to doing some pretty good, damage at some point. By the end of the game, you should be able to do some pretty good stuff to enemies, but but also the encounter deck should be doing pretty good stuff to you too. So like it's tough. It's a tough.
Yeah. Let me just to make sure we answer some of the very common questions and misconceptions about combat before we wrap things up. David, what happens if I attack an enemy and I do some damage but not enough to kill it? So I attack my 4 spider for 3. It takes 2 damage, but it's not destroyed. What happens? Does it go to the staging area again?
Well, so this is similar to the locations, right? When we talked about the travel phase for that. When you engaged an enemy, that enemy stays in your play area and it doesn't move unless a card effect moves it from there. So it stays engaged with you. It doesn't go back to the staging area, and it doesn't contribute its threat to the next round's quest phase. It just stays engaged with you, and it's kind of like sitting there, and you're kind of like fighting it and waiting for the next combat phase to hopefully kill it. And that's a common thing.
So it's going to attack me again next turn.
Next turn.
Until I kill it. It's going to constantly harass me.
Right.
Until I find a way to destroy it.
Right. And then there's some cards like Chieftain Uftak that, you'll want to try to destroy immediately, because every turn Chieftain Uftak gets stronger and stronger, and that's frustrating. So
yeah, the game does sort of, if you can't succeed in certain areas, you can fall behind quickly. The game can sort of snowball on you if you consistently fall behind to a point where catching up is very difficult, if not impossible, because you're sort of on this downward spiral to have your characters destroyed or your threat reach 50 to the elimination level. So it's best to stay ahead of the deck as much as you can.
Yeah. And I think, that's a pretty detailed analysis of the combat phase. Yeah, and I kind of knew that this was going to be the long one, and this is the one that most people find the most exciting. And again, there's a ton of decision points to be made, and especially at higher player counts. How are you going to kill things, ranged, sentinel? How are you going to defend things, and then leave enough characters to be able to, kill as many things as you can? There's a lot of decisions to be made there, and some of them may be right, and some of them may be wrong. There's not just one way to go through the game and make all the right decisions. That's what. That's why this game has such great value, is because there's a lot of replayability, as different cards are being revealed and as cards are, entering, and as you make different decisions based on the cards in your hand. Like, it's just a phenomenal game in that way. I always have compared it to poker in that way. Poker's like the ultimate card game for decision making, and so this is that sort of thing.
Yeah. That will pretty much wrap up the combat phase. You just make as many attacks as you can. Hopefully you call your enemies. Some of them might stand with damage on them, in which case you deal with their attack next turn. You get to attack them back next turn. But any shadow cards that were revealed, those are now discarded. So you revealed them, you resolve their effects, you discard that shadow card if there are any enemies in play. We'll make a special note, too, for commonly asked things. If you play the card Feint from the core set, which is the tactics card that prevents an enemy from attacking, that shadow card is not revealed. So since the enemy did not attack, you do not flip their shadow card, and then at the end of the phase, that unrevealed shadow card just gets discarded with all the other cards.
Yep. And similarly, Forest Snare, which cancels an attack from the enemy, if you put a Forest Snare on an enemy, that card still gets a shadow card, but that enemy doesn't make an attack, so you just discard the shadow card much in the same way as Feint. So it's helpful because if you go back, 35 minutes ago to the beginning of the show when you're dealing out shadow cards, going through the encounter deck, that's just one more, again, incremental progress. That's just one more card towards the end of the encounter deck and possibly not having shadow cards in a future turn. So,
yeah. Yep. So that's it. So hopefully we addressed most of the common mistakes that new players might make. There's a couple more subtle things regarding the action windows, but reference the rule book. Hopefully this episode clarified more than that, because there's plenty of room for interpretation in this game with the way the rules are written. So, but as David's mentioned before, feel free to make comments on the video itself, or send us an email, post on our Facebook page, or send us a message, and we'll be able to hopefully answer your question, or if not, we'll point you to some resources either from FFG or from the community that will help you out.
Yep. Well, there you have it. That's our show on the combat phase. So join us again as we take on more phases in the game, and it looks like we just have the refresh phase to go. So have a great day, everybody.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube, and there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.